Yeah, yes, people wonder how we get such great speakers up here, and we have to promise. How do you trick an American to come to Winnipeg in December? Yeah, it takes quite a bit of behind the scenes thing. Fortunately, Dr. Brian Arnall who spoke with us yesterday, is also an avid fisherman and outdoorsman. And Amy, is there any wild boar wandering around your neck of the woods? Apparently, night vision and AR, whatever's, he can look after your problem there too. But we're delighted. We have Dr. Arnall on double duty this week. He spoke to us yesterday morning, and now back really into your forte, soil fertility and nutrient management, and wanting you to showcase some of the success stories or things that you're doing with field strips that agronomists might be able to work with farmers to fine-tune some of their fertility issues. So yeah, you had a very academic introduction yesterday, and I'm just going to kick it over to you now.
Thank you for such a great applause for after lunch. And thank you, committee, for putting me after lunch. It's such a pleasure and honor. So I want to warn the crowd. So as we go through this, my approach for all things is that I look for the weak points. I look for failure points. I want to understand all the things that go wrong so I can utilize it properly. So while I might dig on a technique or a process, it's not that I don't use it. I feel more comfortable using things if I know where they're going to fail. Does that make sense? And so I want to poke some holes on some very commonly used and recommended things that I also recommend on a daily basis. But we can't really move forward if we don't acknowledge our failure points and make adjustments for that. So just a couple things as we move, and I want to kind of give you some background, but I think this is a big problem is that, you know, I've been doing my science now for about 20 years, so I'm still a young pup compared to some of the others in here. But I came at it at a different level because I didn't come from a farm. So everything was new, everything was different. I didn't have preconceived notions. And I do like young scientists that don't have preconceived notions because they don't know what they don't know. And so they can ask questions differently. And it's not me that's asked it, but you know, some of the times when we've been doing something for, I don't know, 100 years, we're doing it. Now, there is reason. I want to tell you there's a reason you're doing the things you're doing. There's a reason grandpa and dad and uncle and aunt did things. The question is it still the right reason today? Or could we tweak it? And I'm also going to say there's a great comment yesterday about precision ag is that especially the academics get really bound up in 99% R square. We got to be perfect all the time. I love the thought that agriculture should be incremental change, and incremental doesn't have to be big. In fact, it's not going to be big. Agriculture will never be perfect. We are in the scenario where perfection is impossible because we're dealing with a natural environment that is nothing but random. And you cannot be completely random and predict randomness that is just becoming more and more random as we go. There's been some fun papers. And so I just like these. I think this comment is also, we got to just look at it differently. So I'm not going to get into it, but that's been my approach on an extension side is I don't want to do the things that everybody else has done. I want to do things. And now that I'm tenured and it's really hard to fire me, my approach is high risk. So my research is more high risk, meaning I'm expecting probably a good 3/4 of the stuff I try to fail and fail miserably. But if you don't have that risk, how are you going to get the big home runs? The big home runs that were hit in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in the technology, they weren't just, let's just try this and it was a big risk that pushed forward that made the big home runs. And so that's kind of how I take my research arm. Now, this is the poking the bear, and I do this. And so I'm going to remind you, I am a soil fertility specialist. I run a soil testing lab. I love soil testing for recommendations, but let's just truly understand it is a flawed science. Not a flawed science. No. I take that back. It's not a flawed science. It is a science that has been applied in areas in ways that it was not meant for when it was developed. I mentioned this yesterday. We did not do phosphorus rate recommendations to be applied at a 10 meter by 10 meter resolution. We made phosphorus recommendations to be applied across the a province. You know, my state, this is a fun thing. We have one recommendation for phosphorus and wheat, and I have alligators and antelope. It's from one end, I have wheat on both corners too, but it's one phosphorus rec. Why? Because it works 95% of the time. And so we're very accurate at what we do. Accuracy is not precision. Current methods are not very precise and break it down. And one last comment we'll get, I won't do this because I'll forget to say it, is if we look at soil testing, which I love it, it's what I do half the time, and let's acknowledge what a soil test is a chemical extraction to replicate a biological reaction. There's a lot going on, and we tend to see it as a 2D view when we look at soil testing. And the more and more we go, the science goes, it's really a 3D aspect. And I'll get to that some of my other work and why my things go. So poking the bear. This is slides been shown across the world for decades. Accuracy and precision, just understanding. I can be extremely precise and very wrong. We're going for accurate and precise. So that I would say, if we hark back to yesterday, we have some really precise technology that's really, really wrong. But it can repeat the wrong all the time. So this is where I get to some of the stuff. All right, so let's break down nitrogen. This is the world that I'm going to work in, and what I go back and we talk about mechanistic. I like numbers. I like mass balance. Mass balance to me makes sense. You have things there. If you remove things, then it's less, right? If I want things, I need more. So the Stanford equation, it's not new. And I'm assuming in every soils class, even up here this far north, you've probably taught Stanford equation at some point. So fertility needed equals the crop demand, I don't care if it's in uptake, whatever, minus what the soil provides or loses, and then the efficiency of the fertilizer. I always start with my class, those are three very simple numbers. Once you have the crop in the ground, or not once you have the crop in the bin, right? It is really easy once you've harvested to know exactly what you have. The week before you sow up here, how confident are you can be plus or minus 1 bushel at the final yield of what you think you're going to get? Huh? Plus or minus 10? You know, I'd say we got some dryland corn farmers that, you know, an 80 bushel or 90 bushel corn might be their average, but it's a range of 0 to 200. And so their confidence level is about 100 plus or minus, right? And so where are we at? So that crop. So this is some of the approaches we've taken to break this into something that's a little bit more precise. Oh, this is something, John will appreciate this. This is a nitrogen cycle. If you take my fertility class, you're expected to recreate this on a blank sheet of paper 100%. This is not on, it is on their final exam that I'm grading right now, and I need more whiskey. But this is, you do this 100% to the plus and minus, and you get a laminated card that says you're a nitrogen engine. Now, the point of this being up there is not for you to understand it, but for you to understand nitrogen is complex. Simple as that. And the central driver is organic matter, which is also complex and is also driven by weather, which is fun, right? So let's look at this. Oh, no, I forgot. I forgot how I put my slides together an hour ago. So how do we do P&K? So this is introducing the problems. Correlation calibration. So John, when was that done for the problems up here? In the 60s. Yeah. Most of it was in the 60s. We have this amount of phosphorus, we get this amount of yield, we put this much on, we get this kind of yield. The correlation calibration, P&K, standard rule of, gold label. Look at those beautiful curves when you look at the response given the background level. But we get to reality if we try to rebuild those calibration curves. This is what Texas A&M used to redo their cotton calibration curve for potassium. Beautiful, right? There is no option for 2 or 3 lines to be drawn in there. Where do you find? You find that the least objectable point, which happens to be at around that 200 milligrams per kilogram of potassium extraction. But could you maybe imagine a couple different lines being drawn through this? Yeah, this is the real world of correlation calibration studies. Guess what? Mineralogy might influence. Moisture might influence. Well, genetic might influence. So the reality is that even the correlation calibration, which works on the 95th percentile, because I'm going to tell you, if I don't fertilize above 200, I probably won't get a response. Or if I fertilize above 200, I probably won't get a response. I might. But if I go to Vegas, my probability is a lot less than if I have a 10. And that's all correlation calibration is think of Vegas odds. It's a probability of response or no response. If I'm above my critical threshold, my probability of response is low, not zero. If I'm below, it gets higher. The further below that number goes, the higher my probability of response goes, but not guaranteed. It's never 100% guaranteed you'll get a response. And at times, if we think about the system as a 3D, it's not 100% guaranteed that you won't get a response. So this is an example of getting a response when you shouldn't have. And so as a soils lab, I get told all the time, your soil test K procedures are worthless. They're not good because I have high soil test K and I get a deficiency. Well, this was a case. 250 part per million potassium, and we have right about peak pod loading, we have potassium deficiencies. There's the roots. Is it the soil's problem, the plant can't access it, or is it the soil test problem that the plant can't access the soil test potassium? Or is it maybe the production system that caused plantar compaction when they put it in a wet clay that didn't allow the roots to explore the full volume? Because on a soil test, we're assuming the plant has basically an unlimited volume, that as the plant grows, its roots are not restricted. So if we look at a crop like a soybean or any of our legumes, high yielding beans, we're going to pull 3 to 5 pounds of K per day during pod fill. If I have any root limitation, nematodes, compaction, talking about compaction yesterday, talked about compaction today. Is compaction creating problems? And these beans look beautiful to about R3. Why? It had the potassium it needed for the vegetative. It did not have the potassium it needed for the reproductive. So this is a question. And this is one of my things I want you to think about. Lime, and I know there's probably not a whole lot of lime, but let's think of soil testing in your soils classes. Why is lime recommendations the absolute premier as far as not only accurate but precise recommendations? How many in here even know how we get a lime recommendation? A couple. Okay, there's at least 3 or 4. So lime isn't recommended by pH. Lime is recommended by a buffer index. And so you're actually putting a base into the soil and seeing how the soil reacts to the addition of your product. Your soil that was sampled is sent in and you see how it responds to the addition of lime. It'd be beautiful if we could do that for phosphorus and potassium, because we know as soil scientists, we have phosphorus fixing, K fixing. We have all these soils that respond differently to the addition of free phosphorus, potassium. But no soils lab really wants to bring that on because it's not fun, it's not cheap, and it's not fast. So that's why we don't have phosphorus buffer mechanisms or testing or potassium buffer testing. So how do we get around that? Let's do buffer index. We'll go through here. Timeline. So the approach that we're going to take on nitrogen, this is just our approach down south. And understand our wheat grows for a very long time. We've been sowing since October and we're still sowing today. And we'll hit flag leaf around May and we'll harvest around June, mid-June. So early May, flag leaf, June, we're harvesting wheat. And so this is the approach we take. Now, typically December and January, we have no snow, no rain, no nothing. We've got an inch this year, so that's about 200% more than average. So we're different than you. I'll acknowledge that. But the approach can be, and there's been work in Canada. Guy Lafon did some amazing work early on, and Chris up here was a part of it early on in looking at the applications. So, 1, we acknowledge that yield is not consistent. I cannot go to a field and predict the yield before I plant. I know Purdue and Illinois and Indiana, those corn, they say, well, I don't know my corn yield. It's either going to be 245 or 255. Wow. But wheat, corn, it's about the rain, it's about the temperature, it's about all the things that we have no clue what's going to happen as we bring out that crop. And so if our number one input is how much does a crop need because it's based upon yield, we kind of have to figure out yield somewhere in the season before we It's after the point of we put it in the ground. Or we could predict it early. We do that by mid-season vegetative size, little wheat, little yield, big wheat, big yield. That's the simplistic form of it. We have models, we can adjust them. Don't worry about the model, but we're predicting yield about jointing to make our recommendation. Now we got to figure out that whole N in the soil. Nope. Here's the deal. Pre-plant soil samples, especially in my country, pre-plant would be August. The plant needs nitrogen in February. What's the chance that the nitrate's the same in August as it is in February? It happens, but it's by accident, not by reality. It changes every day. In season, folks aren't going to slow down to go pull in season soil samples. It's already been shown. We can barely get them to pull pre-plant. So in season on every field is not going to happen. So what do? We let the crop tell us. Ask you, in this crowd, we've got some applicators, we've got farmers. Have you ever seen a skip where the applicator might have forgot where they were at and they skipped? Show of hands. Anybody ever seen an overlap? A double up? There you go. Did you learn anything from that? Yeah, overlap. If you see it, it's like, I need more. If I see a skip, it's like, well, I'm glad I put on fertilizer. In the livestock, how many of y'all have any calf, or cattle operations or anything, pastured, whatever? And no cattle, like a one. Well, you've got two. There's more than two. I know, Tim. Have you ever seen in a pasture these green spots that show up? Fertilize your damn crop, Tammy. Sorry, I apologize. So what is it? It's a urine patch. It's the ammonium. It is a response to the addition. Sometimes it's a response to moisture. I get that because it's so dry, but it's the addition of nutrients. The field is saying it needs it. We call it cowpox. If you go to Colorado, it's dog pox because it's all the special dog parks over there. But it's cowpox in our pasture. Guess what? If you see it, the rest of the crop. Look at that picture behind me. This is the thing about variability, is the line between whether's nitrogen, whether's not nitrogen, is that there because of soil textural change? Is it because of rainfall change? Is it because of variety change? Or is it that inch change because there's more nitrogen or less nitrogen? It's the nitrogen. And so we look at this, the response. If I have a big response, that tells me my residual nitrogen is low. The nitrogen, not just residual, but the nitrogen the crop has access to is low, which it could be that maybe it's had a lot of shallow range or a little bitty rainfall, so we don't have root exploration to depth, so we're living on the top of the soil surface and we're not going down. Or if it doesn't show up, maybe it's because I got really good at root exploration, I'm really reaching down into the depths of the soil profile and I'm getting it, or I've got more or less mineralization. This is what we use for the soil aspect of the system. We call it the enriched strip. These are the applicators. We have ATVs, trucks. That's a truck with a chem tote. That's a chem sprayer. And then our number one applicator for the small folks is a spinner spreader. Push spinner spreader, because you could use a Toyota Corolla and move around with a bag of urea and get it done. The point is, think about this as a farmer or a consultant. If you think your farmers that you're advising don't put on enough fertilizer, sneak out in the middle of the night and put it out in the field. If it shows up, say, hey, go fertilize. Or put it out and not see it. This is what I tell my farmers that use these. And we're not talking technology. We're talking a yes, no. If you see it, you're going to get a response to fertilizer. You make the rate. If you don't see it, you can still fertilize, but the crop's telling you it doesn't need it at this moment in time. You can predict out if it needs it or not. That's up to you. And my folks, and I'm going to have to do it miles per hour, so please forgive me. Our typical wheat checking speed is around 45 on a rough dirt road, 40 miles. And if it's a blacktop, it might be 75 if it's clear. And so you need something that you can see on the fly. But it's a yes or no, right? That's the point of these. And I want to say as CCAs, are you not educators? So as a CCA that I work with, the CCAs are always looking at that conversation point to have with their customers. Something like this is a conversation point, a learning opportunity. By the way, this is any scale. This is my cover crop for my garden. It's a winter wheat, winter canola cover, and you could see the two different parts of the garden that was fertilized and unfertilized. We can also use cover crop to let us know what nutrients might be responsive in the falling cash crop. with just random strips out there. You can see where I had crop failure, garden failure in other spots. We use it. We're estimating 1 to 2 million acres in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. We don't put it out. It's just the farmers. These are just pictures. The people always said when I talk to farmers, like, it's not worth time. So this is some feedback. Basically, the farmers that use this stuff said it'd take about a half a day to put them out and a half a day to use our calculator. And their return was usually about $4,000 an hour. So when they always gripe about it, it takes me too long to put them out. It's half a day for four. I got guys that put out 4,000 acres worth of strips in 8 hours. I mean, it's not a big thing. So don't tell me the time. But what we also learned, this gets some stuff that goes with Amy and I, the conversation was really fun. We're finding the delay of the inputs. One, economics. We can make the decision whether we want more or not based upon price. I know there's some pre-buy and some other stuff that goes, but we have an opportunity to kind of figure out how much we want to invest into that crop. Has it not rained in 90 days? Because I promise when in our winter wheat crop, when it hasn't rained in 150 days, your willingness to put more inputs in is quite low. And as an agronomist, I would tell you, you're correct, right? So one, we find by delaying, in fact, we've got to the point where if I'm growing my winter wheat, again, me in Oklahoma, not you, I want my crop to stress for the first 2 months of its life. I also want my corn to stress for the first 2 weeks of its life, I'm finding out. I want my sorghum to stress. I want my cotton to stress. What happens when that plant stresses early season? We're finding out more scientifically, but it responds specifically in the root system. It explores the profile more actively, looking for water. Farmers would always tell you the worst thing in corn back home is to get a bunch of light rainfall events right after emergence, because that's always when you're going to have goosenecking and you're going to fall over because it's not exploring. You want it to get seed up, you want it to dry a little bit, and then you want it to full on rain because you've now got a root system. Reduced lodging, shorter crop, anywhere from 1 inch to 4 inches, depending on the genetics. I can shorten the crop up by not putting, and we started with, let's cut it back to, I don't want anything more than 9 pounds on for the entire until I get to jointing. And this is for a 120 bushel crop. We're going 120, 130, 140 bushel wheat with high protein and not fertilizing. And I want the residual low, and I want only in seed. I want it to stress. I want it to be yellow. I want it to be ugly. Wheat's an amazing result. I don't know if I would do it with some of your specialty crops or other things. Wouldn't push it that far with corn, but wheat's an amazing resilient plant with its capability. Higher protein by far, less nitrogen. We push our efficiencies. What is 140 pounds pre-plant, I can do with 70 pounds at jointing. And that's with no rain. That's not leaching. You don't leach out with 3 inches of rainfall. It's an efficiency mechanism. And I don't understand it yet. We're learning. This is one thing we're finding. And Amy and I spoke about this, genetics are hugely variable. The 3 plants on the left had enough nitrogen for the first 2 weeks of growth. The 3 plants on the right had almost no nitrogen in a potted system. The exact same mass of root. They weigh the exact same, but the deficient explored the pot. Plants could be lazy. Some genetics, some strains have a tendency to be lazy if you allow them to be lazy. How do you get to be lazy? A whole lot of pre-plant nitrogen and plenty of water at planting. Running out of time. All right. I wanted to put another one on here that the older crowd would understand when the first part of the line, but I was like, this crowd may not go with it, but there's some risky business memes that I was really tempted to throw up there, which again, only half of you would know. So aging myself. If you don't want to, try a 0. These are applicator width by 30 foot. This is corn, irrigated corn. This is 300 bushel potential. This year we had, I don't know, I think it's about 60 to 100 pivots that had these spots. Same farmer had one pivot that 0 showed up at 6 leaf and one pivot right across the road that showed up at like it was almost basically it's well past brown stick, is well past tassel, well past silking that showed up. So what happens if I see a 0 strip show up at V6? It tells me that crop is going to be dependent completely upon the fertilizer I provide. If it doesn't show up till tassel, she's rocking and rolling. So wherever a point is it shows up is giving you the idea of when you're running out in the system. And you might be shocked about what the zero would yield, or you might not be. But I guarantee you, zero does not mean 0 bushel. These are zeros. You see two. There's one on the south end of the field, one on the north end of the field. You see some regional differences. You see a water spot that's red. Moving through the last couple, we do a lot of folks where we take what was 0 and double it up. So I take the fertilizer that would have gone on the 0 and I just apply it on the just north of it on a 2x straight. It's basically really easy to do with the technology we have now to put out 0 strips or 2x strips. And they're learning opportunity. Last couple of minutes. Phosphorus and potassium. Strips. Oh, yeah. I almost pulled the Kool-Aid guy down on this one. But so, yeah, we're doing those and we're having a lot of luck with them, specifically on our heavy K users like beans, cotton, edible beans, all those crops that have a tendency to be heavy loaded. We put them out at pre-plant, and if we see it around R1, we go over the top with 0060 top dress, and we've been able to basically not completely lose, but recover, significantly recover. So it's those environments where we might have a clay pan, might have a compaction, or we just might have limited root growth. We let those tell us if we need it or not. And on my higher yielding stuff, we are consistently now moving from pre-K to a split where part goes down pre, the rest is going down pre-reproductive when we're really trying to push yields in soils that I know are going to have K problems. Pushing high yield beans, high yield cotton, it's a split application. 0060, we don't need anything any different. Then spatial response, those pictures again. I don't know why we've got this, more K strips. Last, Omission. So if you're doing the starter, this is a learning opportunity for basically you turn off the starter and find out where. I had a lot of farmers find out there were parts of the field that their starter was actually a negative. Why? Because the starter increased early season growth, which was not good in a deep sand and a hot environment. Part of the fields that is a huge benefit. Ultimate goal, this is my take home, be site specific with site specific data. And it would be great if you could do replicated studies, but a strip is a huge learning opportunity. With that, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with you as a group. It's been a lot of fun, and I've learned so much. And I know that having an Okie here is kind of a stretch, but it's been a great honor for me.
Tell your friends that coming to Winnipeg in December is not so bad either. Yes.
I didn't wear my jacket today.
This isn't always the rule though, but yeah. Yeah. Any questions for Brian? We've got time for one or two, hopefully. Okay. Shoot. Are there any online, Marla? You want to do one there first?
Yeah. How are you applying the potassium in top dressing with potash not being mobile?
Okay, so potash is relatively mobile. KCl is highly mobile. It's a salt. So when it dissolves, it moves in with that rainfall. In fact, we're also doing top dress phosphorus in wheat using triple super and DAP, and it's moving down to the root zone and having nice results. But it is mobile when it first dissolves. It becomes immobile as it starts binding with the clay particle.
So those 0 like nitrogen checks, those are pretty interesting. How do you kind of use those to adjust your fertility in season? Like what approach are you taking?
So we could do sensor and fancy stuff all day long, but you can also do just some napkin math, what I would call, or barber room method. It's all the same. So if it shows up at V6, you know what the plants need for the rest of it, and just figure that out. You know the uptake. We have the uptake curves from all the universities, so you know what's taken up by that point. And if it goes yellow at V6, now you know the rest of it has to be fertility. If you've got maybe 100 pounds or 100 kilo already on, you can figure out, it tells me I need 80 to reach final, so I'm okay, or I need 200 because I ran out so early. And you can add your efficiency. Maybe it's been wet, so you show up early, it's been really wet. So it says I need 80, but I'm probably really inefficient this year, so I need to bump another 80.